Welcome to It's Good to Be the King, a 13-part retrospective into the career of one Melvin James Kaminsky, aka Mel Brooks. We're covering his full directorial filmography, as well as a couple ancillary Brooks projects tracking his career from 1967's Oscar-winning The Producers to 2005 musical adaptation of the same name. Today, we're discussing Brooks's other 1974 classic, following in the wake of Blazing Saddles, the spooky, kooky ode to Universal monster movies that is Young Frankenstein. I wrote this and I knew I was going to stumble over that. Written by Brooks and star Gene Wilder, Young Frankenstein meticulously recreates the atmospheric style of James Whale's 1931 film Frankenstein, and I'd say to a lesser effect, Bride of Frankenstein. There's some nods there. To hilarious effect with a wild ensemble cast that includes Wilder, Peter Boyle, Terry Garr, Cloris Leachman, Marty Feldman, Madeline Kahn, Kenneth Mars, and, surprise, Gene Hackman. And joining me today is someone who's come much closer to Mel Brooks than most of us could say. Steve Fodor, welcome to the show.
Hello! Would you like to have a roll into hay?
roll
into hay!
This movie is just a symphony of funny accents, which I'm all about it.
It's fantastic. This is an utterly perfect film. 1974, you mentioned Blazing Saddles. The fact that Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein were both released that same year, and that happens to be the year that I was born. So I have been studying this film literally my entire life.
You've been preparing your whole life for this conversation.
This is the moment that I've been waiting for 52 years coming up.
So you have a history of podcasting. Have you never covered Mel Brooks in general, or have you?
Of course we did. On Too Much Scrolling, my podcast that I ran for 10 years, we covered everything. And yes, Frankenstein was a big conversation that we had because we did a book of the week, and Frankenstein was literally the first book that I ever loved. Nice. This is the book and this is actually my copy from high school. This is a very old book. It smells like it. This is the book that made me love storytelling and reading. This was the moment. And I talk to my students. I'm a school teacher. And I talk to my students about finding that one book. If they don't love reading, if reading is boring, it's just that they haven't found the right book yet. For me, that was Frankenstein. The science of science fiction. That is the original science fiction story. And I just fell in love with it and built my whole life around it.
So then, let me see. Before we get into Mel Brooks and Frankenstein itself, we'll tell people a little bit about who you are and how you've built your life around the story, I guess. The basement lab you have in your house, like what's going on?
So I'm speaking to you from my basement lab. I can show you the article from the Chicago Tribune, the 3-page article about my basement and my stunning collection of all of my memorabilia. I am a pop culture fanatic. I love everything about pop culture. But as I get older, I'm finding that definition of pop culture is aging with me. My things that I love are 30 to 50 years old. And I don't know ASAP Rocky, and I don't know, or ASAP Rocky. I got that one right. And I don't know these modern characters in these modern movies. I'm stuck in an age, and really that's the key to Young Frankenstein. We have young Mel Brooks loving the genre of Universal horror monsters from the 1930s, and then Gene Wilder coming to him and saying, let's make this movie, and he jumps on the chance because of that pop culture that he grew up with, that he fell in love with in the 1930s. 40 years later, they go, let's make this movie.
It's also funny how that cycle of inspiration that you see with like now filmmakers today being inspired by the people they grew up with. In the 70s when George Lucas did Star Wars, it was like inspired by the Flash Gordon things that he grew up with and all of that. And so it's like everything is sort of cyclical in that way. And even with Mel Brooks, like a Frankenstein movie wouldn't necessarily feel like it's in his wheelhouse if you look at the producers, the 12 Chairs and Blazing Saddles, not to mention all the television work he did before that. And yet here we are, and it doesn't feel like a marriage that would make sense on paper.
When you think about it, that age, when you are 10 to 14 years old, that is your time where you form who you are. We had a comic book writer on Too Much Scrolling once, and I asked him, when's the golden age of comic books? And he said, it's when you were 10. That's the golden age of everything in your life. Your music is from when you were 10 to 14 years old. And as a middle school teacher, I think about that all the time. I am part of their story. When they are in that golden era, they're not the nicest people, but they are listening and they hear and they are forming who they are at that age. Mel Brooks said, you really have to know a genre to make fun of it. And to really know it, you have to love it. He loves the Universal Monsters of 1930s filmmaking. That was his time. That was his wheelhouse. So making this movie made sense.
Yeah, no, and I love that this one of the things that we love about Mel Brooks is that everything he does, including the parody, always comes from that positive place. It comes from that joy. It's, last time we talked a million years ago about the Muppet movie, that's a force for a movie, which, by the way, features Mel Brooks. We should point out there's a connective tissue there. That they are a force for good in the world. They're bringing something joy and happiness, and it's not from like a mean, nasty place. And I think the parody genre would later sort of devolve into like, oh, I remember that, I get that reference, and it didn't have that same heart behind it. And I think that's the difference that separates the good examples of that. Like, we have a Naked Gun movie from a couple years ago that was made by essentially the Lonely Island guys, and you can feel that they're trying to put that love in there that they have for the movies in that franchise that they grew up with.
We're missing out right now in those adult comedies, that era of where we could say these things. Blazing Saddles is a miracle for 1974. There is no way that somebody could make Blazing Saddles today. Or as Mel Brooks says, you could, it just wouldn't have any jokes in it.
And yet that movie, which, we covered already last episode in this series, doesn't feel mean-spirited. Like, if anything, it's using the language, including the N-word, to like be like, isn't this ridiculous how these people are?
The anti-racist
morons. Yeah.
It is the perfect anti-racist film. It is absolutely poking fun, satirizing the racists, going, you fools, look at yourselves in the mirror and tell me this isn't foolish activity.
Yeah.
It's perfect anti-racism.
It is. And I think a lot of times people misread that initially. Like the media literacy today, it's concerning with young people today, where I'm like, did you watch this? Like, do you not understand what the filmmaker, the storyteller is trying to get across?
Spoilers, no, they do not understand. They only see the very short TikTok version of that one line, that one joke, that one word, and they don't read the whole book. That is one thing in education. They don't read the whole novel anymore. They read parts of this writing and they don't get the full picture. So literacy, both of the written word and of media, is a frightening thing in the 21st century.
Yeah, where's the context? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Before we get more into Young Frankenstein, what specifically What does Mel Brooks mean to you as a filmmaker, and what was your first introduction to his work?
That's my first introduction to Mel Brooks was certainly these two films, Blazing Saddles
Yeah,
and Young Frankenstein. I remember very clearly Young Frankenstein being broadcast on television. I was a kid that grew up without cable TV. I never had that 24-hour cable TV lifestyle. It
right.
was all over the antenna, and they broadcast this movie, Young Frankenstein, on television, and my father was enamored with this, and he set up the VCR to record this movie and was very careful. He was trying to pause the recording to take out the commercials. And
Yeah.
I still have in my memory, I don't know if this is a story that you can relate to, but I still have in my memory where the pause was a mistake in that recording. And forever, that scene, when I watch it in its entirety, I go, oh, that's different. Did they change this movie? Because in my copy there was a incorrect pause. I missed part of that scene. This is a film that led me to my career in producing on stage. This is a film that led me to my career in comedy, in my career in talking, storytelling. The story being told here by Gene Wilder mostly and Mel Brooks, they wrote it together, is phenomenal in its love for this
Hmm.
genre. And just wrapping that love and that satire of humanity with the comedy that is pure. It is pure comedy. That's where my love for this man and his work started.
I think with this particular one too, not only does he have that love for the material, but it's like I sort of alluded to in the intro, such attention to detail that like I forgot there's a credit in the opening where it's special thanks for like the original Frankenstein lab equipment.
Yeah, which they had. There was a
That's
man who
wild.
had all of that lab equipment in his garage and somehow Mel Brooks found out that all of that equipment was still there. That man was on the set making all of that work, shining it all up and making it even more like the 1931 movie. Mel Brooks describes it as photographic verisimilitude. It's like the 1930 movie, but even more so. The lighting, especially the lighting that they used,
Hmm.
knowing full well that they were going to make this in black and white. The studios did not want a black and white movie.
Yeah.
They absolutely did not. And Mel Brooks made this in black and white on a style of film that could not be colorized. It is impossible to colorize. So much, okay, but maybe we have the technology. But he absolutely did not want this to be in color. The Frankenstein's monster is not green. He is not green. His makeup is green so that when in black and white, he looks like a corpse.
Hmm.
You need to make sure that you know that when they did the remake of the Munsters
Mm.
and they filmed it in color. I said to the man who plays Herman Munster in that film, I said, they did you bad. They did this poorly. The lighting is lit for black and white. Red and green lights are
Uh,
shining on all of the faces. It doesn't make any sense. There's no house in the universe that has red and green lights in every room.
right.
It was lit for black and white. And he said, no, you're foolish. You don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I kind of do.
How much do you think that the black and white, obviously, because I also, in preparing for this episode, have the same Mel Brooks Blu-ray set that you have, and I watched some of the special features, and they talked about that, about the shooting on color film and versus black and white, and making sure that it was harder, at least, to transfer over. You couldn't like color it in post or anything. That and also the lab equipment, a lot of the sets, the way that the whole thing is shot. Like, how much do you think that sort of reverence sets us apart from, I guess, other parodies, but also other Mel Brooks movies? Because I feel like this movie carries that level of detail perhaps further than any of the other movies he's ever done.
I absolutely think that. I think that the attention to detail in this is beyond what I've seen from almost any other filmmaker, especially in the 1970s. Filmmaking in the 1970s did not have that attention to detail. I think the other attention to detail director that comes to mind is David Lynch.
Mm.
The way that he shoots a scene is sometimes very frustrating to the actors because he is so meticulous with that attention to detail. And we wouldn't have David Lynch without Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks made David Lynch. He
Yeah.
discovered David Lynch after Eraserhead and decided he was the man to direct The Elephant Man. And Mel Brooks produced that and left his name off of it as much as he could so that it could be a film, a cinematic triumph, but that attention to detail makes a difference.
I'd forgotten that The Elephant Man was David Lynch's second film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember the connection, obviously, with him and Mel Brooks working on The Elephant Man, a movie that I had only seen for the first time, like, last year. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is heart-wrenching, like, incredible movie. But you also see like what Mel Brooks saw in him from Eraserhead and why it fit that material. But yeah, that was his second movie, which is
Mm-hmm.
wild to me. And I think people forget the impact that Mel Brooks has had on the industry, not just with the stuff that he has his name on, but things like that, like The Elephant Man, like The Fly, which he produced, but then was like, let's not say Mel Brooks, presented by Mel Brooks, because people will get the wrong idea. I think this movie toes a very specific line between obviously being hilarious comedy, but then what's cool about it is that unlike Blazing Saddles or Spaceballs or even Robin Hood Men in Tights, things like that, where you're satirizing a genre or a sort of a character that has been carried on throughout. Um, it's really a riff on that one specific movie of
Mm-hmm.
James Whale's Frankenstein, and that the story itself is structured almost like it's a sequel. Like, you can look at this as a very tonally different sequel to those old Universal Frankenstein films, which I think is such an interesting take on a parody film.
He added the details from some of the other Frankenstein movies. The Blind Hermit is from The Bride of Frankenstein,
Right.
1939, and The One-Armed Inspector is from The Son of Frankenstein,
Yes.
1935. So it is the whole genre
It is.
wrapped together, but the way that he was able to spin that yarn for a group of people that would know Frankenstein. Frankenstein is such a cultural icon.
Yeah.
Even in 1974, 43 years after that original film, it's so much a part of who we are. I mean, I can reach and find so many pieces of Frankenstein in
I
my
was
pop
like, I
culture.
think go behind your left shoulder. Yeah.
There's a Frankenstein there
Yeah.
in black and white. There's Frankenberry cereal, for
Nice.
God's sake. I mean, we've got so many different ways that Frankenstein, and as a very tall male human being, I have dressed up as Frankenstein for Halloween
Nice.
many times. There have been many times when wearing a jacket and moaning has been my Halloween experience.
It's also just Frankenstein. It's incredible to me that the novels that, Dracula and Frankenstein and all these other Universal monsters are all the source material that they're based on. And then the films that came out in the 30s and 40s, how they still carry, like, those characters still being permutated on today. Lee Cronin's The Mummy was like from last year. Universal has, I don't know if you've been on Monsters Unchained, but that thing is incredible and has, the portrait of Dr. Frankenstein from that original film hanging in there. Also part of the canon. I grew up with the Monster Squad as a big part of my life. Even the Hotel Transylvania movies, like there's
course.
Frankenstein, there's Mummy, there's Dracula, and all of that. So, and I
Don't
love that.
say blah blah blah.
I have Dracula actually over there on my Funko shelf. Yeah. So he was right on tapping into something that has really endured, and in a way that I think really shows just how sharp his comedic instincts were, that in the 74 it felt relevant, and now in 2026 still feels relevant. Like
Still
it was
feels
still, they're
relevant.
still making Frankenstein movies. It's
Yeah,
not something that's kind of gone away.
those Universal monster movies are a miracle in and of themselves. Junior Lemley, who was in charge of Universal at the time, he was a 23-year-old kid. He was junior. His father was in charge of the studio, and he gave over the reins. And Junior said, "I'm going to make this Frankenstein movie." And his father was against it. His father was against it from the beginning. There's a whole book called It's Alive, published in 2022 by Julian David Stone. I recommend that reading highly, to hear that story of how Frankenstein 1931 came to be, and became, because Dracula was such a success, Frankenstein being the proof of concept that we can do it again.
Mhm.
They then did it again and again and again with differing levels of success.
Yeah, it's incredible. One thing that struck me in preparing for this episode with the special features on the Blu-ray, like I said, is they mentioned in there that Mary Shelley said that scientists have womb envy, is what they said. And I was like, interesting that they're more jealous of that. It's not women have penis envy, and it's that men have womb envy, where they're jealous of the ability to create life. And that is kind of the crux of the Dr. Frankenstein story. And then in here, not necessarily, I feel like it's not like the Frankenstein/monster dynamic isn't always this explicitly a parent-child relationship. And I feel like here it's really sort of crystallized in that way. What do you think that this movie, if anything, has to say about parenting?
It's interesting that Victor doesn't have kids. He's not married.
Yeah.
He's a single man. He's not thinking about that. His fiancée, Madeline Kahn, is probably not the right match for him. We find out by the end of the film. Spoilers for a 52-year-old film. But that parentage. Now, have you seen the Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein from last year?
Absolutely.
The square absolute story of that is fatherhood and childhood, and how fathers and sons specifically work together. But that birth, that action of birthing a child, I can understand how men could be envious of that. I'm envious of my wife, who gave me 2 wonderful sons, and I was able to raise them right, with Universal monster movies and Svengoolie every Saturday.
Nice.
Absolutely, I think that theory holds true.
Yeah, it's always interesting that even in comedies, you're like, okay, but what is the commentary here? And it is there if you look for it. Like, one thing that you mentioned earlier about how Gene Wilder brought this idea to Mel Brooks while they were making Blazing Saddles. Hey, what about a movie about Frankenstein's grandson? But he's not really into the whole reanimating dead tissue thing, but kind of falls into it anyway. I just think that concept already feels kind of groundbreaking. And then there's something about the partnership that those two forge on the producers, and then leading into Blazing Saddles. And then here it feels like the apex of like the two of them at the peak of their powers. Speak a little bit to what Gene Wilder brings to this movie, because it's hard to see anyone else playing this character. He had such a specific energy on screen.
Yeah, he was something special. He was such a quiet man, but when he was on, and he could go from manic to absolutely quiet. He had an acting ability that I don't know that many actors can do. I can't imagine anybody else playing this role. His comedy chops were just spectacular. I think of Willy Wonka. I think of how he was able to switch from very angry to very joyous in that just as well as he is here in Young Frankenstein. But that portrayal of madness, is he a mad scientist? Is he a normal person? He was able to switch between those in a scene Of course, there's so many lines running through my head right now, but there, I've touched it. It's one of my favorites, where he's just thinking about the science. He's just thinking about what he's doing in the work, and they're trying to keep him from going mad. And does he go mad? I don't know. That's an interesting question about Young Frankenstein.
I do find it really fun how the movie justifies the turn where he starts off and he's like, my grandfather's work was doo-doo. And then as he sort of envelops in it, it's a little bit about being in the space. It's a little bit about starts having dreams that kind of infiltrates his psyche.
Destiny! Destiny! No escaping! That's for me!
Yeah.
Destiny!
Exactly. And then when he sees the papers and he's like, it could work.
Might
work. It might work. Yeah. It's like little by little you could see him like it's like the Jurassic Park, you're so busy to see trying to realizing that you didn't stop to think that you should. He's just like, wait a minute, well maybe and he kind of talks himself into recreating the experiment. And I thought it's like a very delicate progression into that. So that by the time you get there, you're like, yeah, no, I buy it. That we got from here to here.
For sure.
So I think that it's a really interesting bit of characterization of how that sort of
and again, that's in the original Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was talking about creation and creationism and science and how science evolved at that time. It was just being introduced to the culture. We did not have science, and then suddenly we had this study that said, we're not sure about this story of God, but maybe. And then she said, well, maybe man could become God and become the creator. And it's all in there. And again, Mel Brooks studied that story. Gene Wilder studied that story, and were able to show the love of that in Young Frankenstein.
Yeah. Do you think this is the best ensemble he ever assembled? Because reading that list of names at the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. Holy crap. Yeah. It's just across the board. Like obviously Gene Wilder is probably the standout because he anchors the whole thing. But like what a murderer's row of supporting players we have. My goodness.
And female actors. The Madeline Kahn, I absolutely loved everything that Madeline Kahn did. Her comedy was phenomenal. Cloris Leachman was a brilliant actor. And I notice I'm giving the past tense for all of these names, except for Mel Brooks. They are all lost to us, but at the same time not, because we still have this film and all of the others. Cloris Leachman as Granny in the Beverly Hillbillies movie is absolutely brilliant. Terry Garr, the young lady who is beautiful, who is wonderful. She put on a funny accent for this movie. She wasn't sure of herself, but she did it. Peter Boyle, there's so many things that he did after this that all I could see was the creature from Young Frankenstein. Marty Feldman with his wacky eyes. Can you imagine Igor being played straight without Marty Feldman in this? There's no way. And then we get Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman asked to be a part of this production. And then Kenneth Mars as Inspector Kemp, with the wooden arm. Phenomenal. The acting is so good. Gene Wilder, at the end of this production, Gene Wilder sat in the set and said to Mel, I've got some ideas. We can make some more scenes. I've got some more ideas. I can write some more things. And Mel said, Gene, we're done. It's over. He didn't want to go. He cried at the end of this production. So to ask the question, is this the perfect cast? Is this the group of people that should have made 17 movies together? Yes, the answer is yes.
I think people forget too, 1974 Gene Hackman. This is Gene Hackman, French Connection Gene Hackman. This is Gene Hackman at the peak of his movie stardom also. So to have him show up in the middle of this movie for a scene, it was kind of a big deal at the time.
I was going to make espresso. For him to be as funny as he is, he's playing straight,
Yeah.
and it's all in Peter Boyle's facial expression for the reaction for the comedy. But Gene Hackman was a dramatic actor at the top of his game in 1974, and for him to come in to be hidden under the makeup and the beard, and to be able to play, this was joyous.
Absolutely. And you mentioned already Terry Garr, who auditioned for Elizabeth and then ended up as Inga. And it's like, it happened exactly the way it was meant to. Obviously, we discussed Madeline Kahn quite a bit in our last conversation about Blazing Saddles. Just even with just a handful of scenes, you're just like, can't stop thinking about everything she does in both those movies. Like, I think that's my biggest complaint about Madeline Kahn in both this and Blazing Saddles. Like, there was not enough. Like, I could have used more of her always, because she just, I don't know. There's certain director actor pairings that always paid off. I think Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks was obviously one, but Madeline Kahn, I think, is like under discussed as just how perfectly she slipped into every role that he gave. I mean, we'll see her again in High Anxiety, for instance, and History of the World Part 1. So like, they worked together a few times after this, and I think every time it's just, so it feels really special.
And all credit to Mel Brooks giving those strong female parts important roles in this movie. That was not very normal for 1974. Yeah. And these actors are just so strong in their character that we remember these characters just as much as the stars. They are the stars. It's an ensemble cast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a particular gag or moment with this stunning ensemble cast that really stands out to you? Because there's a million.
There's a million.
Talk about.
There's a million.
You mentioned Igor, and I love the way that upon their first meeting, he gets annoyed with Frankenstein because of the pronunciation, and he says his name is pronounced Igor, and so Frankenstein just sticks with that the whole movie. And he's like, it's actually pronounced Igor. Like, there's all of that stuff. The thing with the hump feels like, and that's the other thing that I, in watching all of Mel Brooks's movies chronologically, sort of like relatively close together, you start to see like, oh, like this kind of running gag, it's just like straight up sets the tone for like, Richard Lewis's mole in Robin Hood Men in Tights, like moving around or things like that. Like you see like earlier kind of prototypical versions of gags that would later reappear. But yeah, everything with Igor is funny. When they're looking at the skulls, it's like, I ain't got nobody, or whatever, that whole thing, like all of that. He's really funny in this.
That opening scene, that first scene where they meet the first time, is that old-fashioned comedy, that the whole walk this way bit. Mel Brooks did not want that. He did not want that, and Gene Wilder was, let's do it, and we'll see, and you can decide. And it's vaudeville idiocy, and it's perfect. It tells us everything we need to know about both of those characters. They are silly characters set in this very serious situation. And we know them to this day because they were very well spelled out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly why I wanted to do the Mel Brooks filmography, do conversations about all of it, because it's just like the Zucker brothers, the Mel Brooks stuff, like all of this was so formative for like my love and appreciation for comedy, like the puns, the wordplay, like the fourth wall breaks, the sort of meta humor that Mel Brooks will continue to kind of play with as he goes forward. All of that, I just think it's so hilarious. Speaking of things that Gene Wilder wanted to try that Mel Brooks was against, of course, the putting on the Ritz was a big point of contention, and I'm sure you, as well as I, have heard the story about that, they got into like a really big argument about it. And then, Derek, go ahead and finish this.
Was it too over the top? Was it ridiculous to a level beyond what they were trying to do with this serious film? And I don't know. Maybe Mel was right. Maybe that is too silly a moment in the movie, but it works.
It does.
Of course they go to the extreme. Of course, in that scene with the audience, they have to find a way to go beyond the expectations. That's good comedy.
Yeah. But I think they got into a big fight about it, and then Mel Brooks suddenly like dropped it. And then Gene Wilder was like, "Oh, that's it? Like that?" It's like, "Yeah, I just wanted to see if you'd fight for it. If I knew if you fought for it hard enough that it was good enough to stay in or whatever." That was like the conversation. And I think it does still land as such a standout moment from this movie, to the point that I feel like that musical number is how we ended up with the stage production of Young Frankenstein, like the full Broadway musical, which obviously wasn't as successful as the producers, but it lived on in another medium. And I think that putting on the Ritz number was probably a big springboard for why that even happened.
I agree with that. The musicality of that, along with the theme of Young Frankenstein is in my rotation of my music that I listen to. It does soothe the savage beast.
Nice.
It is beautiful music. And yes, the musical, okay, it wasn't a huge success, but 485 performances is fine with me. I haven't put this one on stage myself, but I have seen a high school production of it, and the producer of that high school production was absolutely sure that this was the end of her career, that she would be absolutely canceled after putting on this very silly, very suggestive, while being so absolutely family friendly kind of a story. Would you like to have a roll in the hay? He's going to have an enormous Schwanstucker.
Speaking of which, I had that in my notes, that line specifically, but also how the woof like plays like the payoff for the woof later on with Elizabeth.
All Madeline Kahn. That's Madeline Kahn.
Incredible.
Just the idea that she decided that she would sing, "Ah, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you," a song from Naughty Marietta from 1910. That was Madeline Kahn's idea. They had another song that they wanted her to sing, and she goes, "No, it's got to start with it, because what if she's scared? What if the audience is oh dear, she's being sexually assaulted at this time. Oh no, she's fearful. And then, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you." The music of it absolutely led to a musical, a stage musical, no doubt about it.
And it's not to say that the stage production was unsuccessful, but it's just like I think it's only sort of maybe looked at as that way because in comparison with the producers, which was such a phenomenon. Yeah. So that makes, and I think
pales in comparison.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the family friendliness of this. Do you think this is a family friendly? Is this more the most kid-friendly Mel Brooks movie? Because I have a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm like, whoa, what could I play around them?
Next year, when that kid is 10, this is absolutely family-friendly. If that kid is familiar with 1931 Frankenstein, in whatever iteration, if they've seen the monster, the creature, if they've seen something, because Frankenstein, again, is still just a big part of our culture.
Yeah.
We know Frankenstein, even if we haven't seen the film itself. Yeah, this is still... my 10-year-olds saw it for sure.
I think it's between this and probably Spaceballs, that like there's sex jokes in those both, but they're sort of
innuendo.
Like if you don't know what it is, you're like, what is that? I didn't get it. It's one of those things that when they grow up, they'll be like, Oh my
Oh,
God. That's what they
well,
were doing.
it depends on what they've been exposed to
Right.
before this. I mean, I
Exactly.
grew up on Rocky and Bullwinkle. You know, Rocky and Bullwinkle was a talking moose and a talking squirrel as a cartoon. It was for children,
Right.
right? Not so much when you actually figure out what they're actually talking about when you
Uh,
are mature enough. It depends on the background. You know, if the kid is into Star Wars, if Star Wars is a big part of their life, then yes, Spaceballs is the natural. For me, I've always been into the Universal Monsters. Svengoolie's been on TV here in Chicago for 45 years. I was always a part of that culture, and Frankenberry cereal is absolutely something that who I am. That's who I am, is all of these Universal Monsters. So
yeah.
it's the natural for me. But Spaceballs, I could see Spaceballs,
Yeah.
especially with the sequel coming out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I guess you make a good point. It's just like build off of whatever their interests are, and that's your gateway Brooks,
That's why he
essentially.
did the Westerns. You know,
Yeah.
the Westerns was a big part of his culture. And he said, okay, let's make a satire of the Westerns. We're going to make a satire of this. He got to Spaceballs. He said, science fiction. It's not really my thing, but the kids like it. So let's make a satire of Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny too because that obviously we'll get to that when we get to that, but that movie has the legacy of it has really grown over the years, in the way that maybe even Mel Brooks wasn't expecting. Like Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, blockbusters when they came out. I think Spaceballs did solid business, but like since then, there's people like me that have been watching it for 40 years that are like, oh my gosh, like Dark Helmet, you know.
Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein are two of the movies that in that era of channel flipping, if those two movies were on, I would stop and watch that movie again. Despite the fact that I've watched it 100 times before, that would be the movie. Star Wars is one of those movies. I
Yeah.
will watch Star Wars. I watch Star Wars annually. I watch Young Frankenstein every year in October. It is one of those movies that does not make it worse. Time makes it better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
We
So
wouldn't have had Star Wars without Young Frankenstein. Do you know this?
I do not enlighten me.
Maybe Star Wars would not have been made without Alan Ladd Jr. Alan Ladd Jr. was the one who pushed for Young Frankenstein in 1974. By 1977, 3 years later, he was very much in demand, and he was the one who pushed for Star Wars. Mel Brooks is responsible not only for me and my middle school classroom, but for so many amazing pieces of culture, David Lynch and Alan Ladd junior
Mhm.
Young Frankenstein opened the day after The Towering Inferno in 1974. Can you imagine? The Towering Inferno is a huge blockbuster action piece. The next day, Young Frankenstein opened in theaters. The day after that, The Godfather Part 2
Oh my
opened.
gosh.
Can you imagine
Wow.
being a kid in 1974 or even an adult in 1974 and having to choose between those three films on a weekend? You're going to go to the movies 3 times. That's what's missing in our culture today is yes, there are huge blockbuster films that come out 1 or 2 or 3 in a calendar year, not 3 in a weekend like
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So many running gags. I feel like I need to tip my hat to. We sort of did the whole Frau Blucher earlier in this call. I love that.
I can't go anywhere without doing that. If somebody says those words, that has to happen.
I love obviously all of that. I love I'm trying to think so many the whole revolving bookcase scene I think is hilarious.
Put the candle back.
And it also, I also grew up with speaking of obviously another form of Frankenstein, the Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein movie, which that kind of feels like a very I feel like they even have in that movie something with a revolving something like a hidden door or something. I don't remember. I have to go back and rewatch that. But that feels like a routine that would be in one of their versions of the Universal monster movies. So I like that bit of visual comedy.
I love comedy horror.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of straight horror. Especially torture
Yeah.
horror is not my genre. I don't enjoy that. If there's comedy to it, if there's a man with an arm that's
That's the franchise
that's
I
a
was thinking of.
chainsaw, if you can make me laugh in the middle of this horrific scene, if you can make this horrific scene so ridiculous that I'm laughing,
Yeah.
you have my money for sure.
Well, when you said like the torture horror and the horror comedy, I'm like, interesting how Evil Dead started as one.
Mhm.
And, we're talking as Evil Dead Burn is in theaters. Very much like really grisly. Like there's dark comedy kind of sprinkled throughout, but it's so visceral, and it's, a lot of the reviews are talking about how mean it is. And that's one thing that the Raimi movies never felt. And I enjoy the newer Evil Dead movies as well, but they're very like, it's not the same. Like I agree with you. I don't like horror to feel
Mean.
punishing. Yeah, mean or punishing to watch in some way. Where you're like, I'm entertained by this. Like I want to see what happens, but also how much more? Because this is a lot.
You mentioned Cronin's The Mummy, and that's just gross.
Yeah, yes, that was my reading.
Disgusting. It's not joyous. I'm not finding any joy in it. And of course, it's children. Anytime that children are in peril, I'm not enjoying that program.
Yeah.
Once you run out of flowers, what are you going to throw in the lake?
Well, we get a lovely reference to that in this as well. That is an perfect example of what you were saying earlier. Like, this is perfect for kids who have seen the Frankenstein, because they would get the setup of that joke with the little girl where he looks into camera and she like bounces into her bed as her parent. Again, not a mean joke, very light, kind of undercuts. You're expecting something horrible to happen.
Because you're watching horror. You're expecting the monster, the creature, to be horrible, to be murdering this young lady. And no, it's played for a laugh, and she's safe and sound in bed, and everything is fine.
And you've seen the original Frankenstein, where he does throw her in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciated the inversion there. We were talking a lot about how obviously this is most directly about the Frankenstein. There's also a Casablanca kind of parody at the train station, which is sort of the way I read that, which I thought that was great. The whole Madeline Kahn's entrance into the film, the elbow touching, and not the taffeta darling,
taffeta darling, taffeta sweetheart. No, the dress, it's taffeta.
Her coughing as the sort of like smoke is gathering on the screen. All of that is so great.
But I have to say, Airplane did that scene better, where the airplane is taxiing away and the young lady is running, and she's running into things and knocking things over. Yes, that scene has been done so many times over the course of movie history.
We mentioned Frau Blucher. But the way that she essentially scores that confrontation scene with the violin, it was you that did it. He was my boyfriend. That whole thing, incredible.
Ovaltine? We could just quote this movie. We could make a whole podcast that's just, hey, let's say the words from this movie for as many times as we've seen it.
It's been hard with some of these conversations to not just have it devolve into just a script reading of like the whole thing, which in a lot of his movies, you could literally just do that. And it would be very entertaining to listen to, I hope. I think a lot of people make the distinction of, Blazing Saddles is his funniest movie, but Young Frankenstein...
That's what the AFI said. The AFI said just this month, for his 100th birthday, the AFI declared that the Blazing Saddles is the funniest movie ever made in the history of filmmaking.
Do you agree with that? And two, do you agree with, I feel like the general sentiment a lot of the time that I heard is Blazing Saddles is his funniest movie, but Young Frankenstein is his best movie. Like from a craft perspective, from like, overall, the filmmaking on display in Young Frankenstein, it edges out his other works.
I can live with that. I love both of these films equally.
Yeah.
They are my two films on my list of films that I absolutely love. There's plenty of references to Young Frankenstein. I do have the coffee table book that Mel Brooks published.
Nice.
This is a brilliant look behind the scenes, and he recorded the audiobook as well, so you get the stories of Mel Brooks straight from Mel Brooks. In terms of Blazing Saddles, I only have one reference to Blazing Saddles. That's right there. It says, "Never mind that shit. Here comes Mongo." That's the only Blazing Saddles reference I have down here in the collection. But Young Frankenstein is everywhere. I would have to say it is more my favorite than Blazing Saddles, but I love them both equally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one of those movies that somehow gets better the more it ages. I think you could say that about Blazing Saddles as well, but I think there's a certain Blazing Saddles and this movie. I'll focus on this movie. This movie in particular has a certain timelessness to it. And I think it is because of what we've said, that it's an ode to a movie that came out 40 years earlier. And so it feels displaced from time in that way, that you could put this on now and it wouldn't, other than the black and white, which is a stylistic choice, it wouldn't feel like, I could put it on for my kids and they wouldn't be like, oh, this is an old movie. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have that it wouldn't feel like something that from 52 years ago. Because
it is not very 70s. It is very 1930s in such
Absolutely.
a way that is lovingly giving that homage to that genre, loving that genre just as much as he loved the Western. And again, he didn't love science fiction, but he decided to make Spaceballs anyway.
Mm-hmm. And it worked out. I think he found his way into that as well. Obviously, after this, he would later eventually make Dracula Dead and Loving It, a movie not nearly as beloved. I think there's some good stuff there. I think we'll get to that when I get to that episode, to that conversation. I think my big thing with that is the combined forces of Mel Brooks and Leslie Nielsen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, that's kind of all I need. Like, is it as solid a script or as funny as this? Of course not. But like, few movies are. I think you also see some certain connective tissues between this movie and that movie. There's the scene in Frankenstein's introduction where he's like arguing with a student, and there's a kind of a nod to that, I feel like, in Van Helsing's introduction in Dracula Dead and Loving It, where he has kind of this know-it-all student that's kind of trying to one-up him in front of his class. Little things like that I've noticed. I'm like, okay, I see what you're trying. You're trying to make sort of a spiritual companion to Young Frankenstein with Dracula Dead and Loving It. And I don't know that it works completely, but I appreciate the effort, I guess.
I look forward to the generational conversation that's going to be had in Spaceballs 2 with that next generation, those snotty kids coming in and being a part of it. That's what Young Frankenstein is the grandson of this crazy mad scientist who decided to try to make alive what was once dead, and he's being a sour next generation about it. We'll see what comes of that in Spaceballs 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I also do want to mention here that Brooks himself does the voice of Victor Frankenstein, and like I think there's a recording of his grandfather, right? We hear Victor Frankenstein's voice in a flashback or something.
I don't remember that. I think in my recollection, the only sound of Mel Brooks that we hear is the sound of the cat being hit by the darts when
definitely the cat, for sure. But there's a time where they're like, oh, turn it on. I go, oh. They're like, I think you're hearing flashback. I forget exactly what moment it happens in. You're hearing flashbacks of Victor Frankenstein's original experiment. And then I have here that Mel Brooks also does the voice of the werewolf. Then the werewolf, their wolf. That whole scene. Yes. So, and apparently, and I don't know how you can correct my facts on this, that Gene Wilder's condition was not to have Mel Brooks on camera.
Mm-hmm. That was absolutely his condition. He wanted his directorial eye to be able to make this very silly film. And then we've mentioned already, Mel Brooks went on to do production, to be a producer, and to keep his name off of serious films. Because if we saw Mel Brooks' name on something, we had very specific expectations of what that would be. And he didn't want that. He wanted to produce other films and just beautiful, wonderful films that he made.
How do you feel about Mel Brooks as the star of his own movies? Do you think that was a miscalculation? Because I'm going through a lot of these. It's kind of like he's in 12 Chairs, but like a couple scenes as T-Con. He's in Blazing Saddles, kind of playing a similar role that he plays in Spaceballs as President Screw. And then after this, we start to get into the Mel front and center because he becomes such a celebrity in and of himself after this and Blazing Saddles, that then we get the run of silent movie, High Anxiety, History of the World Part 1, etc., where it's just like Mel Brooks and this thing.
Yeah, he's a ham. There's no stopping him. When he had the power to put himself in a movie, he absolutely did so. Yeah. If you've read his autobiography, All About Me, that is the title of his autobiography, All About Me, ! My Remarkable Life in Show Business. It was published in 2021. That's who he is. He's a ham as much as I am. Would I put myself on stage for all of my productions if I could? Yes, I would. Is that a mistake? Quite possibly. I am not the best actor for the role. But think about Blazing Saddles, where he played the Native American with the Yiddish accent and had that last line, that last word on anti-racism. Oi, they're blacker than us. Who else could play that? Who else could do that? Could you get one of the other famous Jewish comedians of the day? Sure, fine. But Mel Brooks himself is such a ham. You mentioned at the beginning of the show that I have been in the presence of Mel Brooks. I journeyed to Los Angeles, California to celebrate his 98th birthday and sat at his feet for 90 minutes while he told stories. He is such an amazing storyteller, in addition to being a singer and a dancer. At 98 years old, he stood up and sang and danced for us, and I sat at his feet in awe. I have built my life around this man. It's like sitting at my grandfather's feet. My grandfather was Jewish, but he wasn't as funny as Mel Brooks. And just being able to hear those stories from him was just phenomenal. I laughed and laughed. I laughed so hard. People who know me know my laugh is infamous. I was shushed by John Cleese on stage. John Cleese did shush me on stage once because my laugh is just absolutely ridiculous. Judd Apatow was there, and he recorded that meeting in 2024 and put it into his documentary, Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. And in that documentary, you can very clearly hear my laugh in the front row. So I did go to IMDb, and I did put my own credit in as the man laughing in the front row for that film. Interesting, that film is now nominated for an Oscar, so I might get an Oscar.
There you go. Best supporting actor, the man laughing in the front row,
unnamed, unknown, enormous fat man in the front row.
No, I'm glad that you're bringing up all this Mel Brooks media, because in the course of doing these episodes, I'm sort of little by little soaking that all up. So I watched the 99-year-old man. I've listened to the audiobook for the Young Frankenstein book that you have. I have the autobiography, and I'm getting into that now. So over the course of these episodes, we all have more tidbits I could pull from that. But yeah, there's just so much to soak up. And I think this is such a pivotal film for his career, for comedy as a whole. It's also really interesting to point out how some of his films have sort of led to continuations in one form or another. We already mentioned the musical. We're apparently supposed to get a FX series called Very Young Frankenstein with Zach Galifianakis and kind of Taika Waititi involved. So I'm cautiously interested in that.
Imagine those two men's careers without the influence of Mel Brooks. They
Right.
are absolutely steeped
100%.
into this as much as I am.
Yeah. So I'm very curious to see what that's going to look like. Any ideas or hopes for what that show turns out to be? Kind of continuing this story, I guess.
I hope that they don't pull punches for the 21st century audience. I hope that they go for the big, broad comedy that is Mel Brooks' style. Taika Waititi's style is definitely very similar, and Zach Galifianakis' very, very dry delivery of very ridiculous characters is ready. I think that the two of them can put something together just as much as Josh Gad was influenced by Mel Brooks, and Spaceballs 2 with him at the helm is going to be something special. There is also the History of the World Part 2 series that happened that didn't have that same broad comedy. It pulled those punches. It did not appeal to me as a Gen Xer looking at that through the lens of, 52 years of looking at Mel Brooks's work.
Yeah. That's kind of why I'm like taking a step back before I prepare any expectations for Very Young Frankenstein, because History of the World Part 2, there are things about it I liked, but it was sort of sprawling and all over the place. I think a lot of people feel that way about Part 1, to be frank, though. I think that movie is kind of divisive. Like, some people love History of the World Part 1, and some people are like, it's kind of scattershot in a way. And I agree with both sides. I enjoy
it's
that,
vignettes.
though.
Because of the vignette nature of it,
Exactly.
I understand that is not a contiguous story. Even when they tried to put a contiguous story in there, it really wasn't that.
Right.
It is kind of scattershot, but as a
charming,
fan of Monty Python's sketch comedy, I appreciate the sketch nature of that storytelling and the ability to go, okay, that's over, that's ended, we're moving on to something else right now.
And I also remember back in the late 2000s when they had briefly Spaceballs, the animated series, and that was just like crushing for me as a person who loves that movie to see that. And I think I saw the first few episodes until I was like, yeah, this is not good.
It's not good. Yeah.
Which is a bummer, because it's like you had a shot at continuing Spaceballs almost 20 years ago and you blew it on that. Like, would we have gotten Spaceballs : the new one not in like early, like 10, 15, 20 years ago? Had we not, the animated series put a stink on it a little bit? Maybe. But everything I'm hearing about Spaceballs 2, Spaceballs the new one, it's leading me to be optimistic. Like, I like all the people involved behind the scenes, in front of the camera. They got Rick Moranis back and all of that. So any attempt to continue Mel Brooks's work, obviously we're going to conclude this whole series with the producers, the 2005 movie musical version. I'm always a little nervous because you're taking Mel Brooks's baby, and yes, he's involved, but he's not as involved as he was in the original conception of things. He's a producer, not writing and directing, not full control. So I'm always a little like, okay, well, be careful with that. That's like, handle with care. This is comedy history you're playing with.
The movie of the musical of the movie. Yeah. By that time, the Xerox copy is kind of faded a little bit. It's not the same as it was. I see that for sure.
Yeah. So hopefully, Very Young Frankenstein, we wish it well, and we hope it's awesome and it keeps the legacy going strong. Is there anything about Young Frankenstein we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure we mentioned before we start wrapping up?
The one thing about Mel Brooks that really stays with me is the way that he is passionate about his productions, the way that he finds joy in his productions. My favorite quote from the production of Young Frankenstein is the story of him with the handkerchiefs. He says he went to the department store and bought white handkerchiefs for everybody in the crew. He told them, if you feel like laughing, stick this in your mouth. I turned around once in the middle of shooting a scene and saw a sea of white handkerchiefs in everybody's mouths. I said to myself, we've got a big hit here. This movie is going to be a big hit because there's only one test of comedy, and that's outright laughter. I don't care how beautiful the lighting is, how superlative the script is, how wonderful the performances are. If you're making a comedy and the crew isn't falling down, holding their bellies, screaming with laughter, you've got a failure. First laughter, then quality. Shame on me, but it's true. That is my mantra for production. If I am producing a comedy and I'm not laughing, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I have to sometimes explain jokes to actors. Sometimes the jokes are not natural. Sometimes I have to show them how to do it to make it funny. But if I'm laughing, I put a handkerchief in my mouth. I'm an old man. I have a handkerchief in my pocket, and I put a handkerchief in my mouth when I'm finding joy in the production. That's the key for me. That is who Mel Brooks is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and you think who Mel Brooks is always comes across in his work. And I think this is possibly the best example of who he is as a person and his comic sensibilities sort of and his skill as a storyteller and a filmmaker and a joke teller sort of encapsulated in this sort of perfect partnership between him and Gene Wilder and this wacky supporting cast that they assembled. Steve Fodor, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
I am on social media in as much as I still have accounts from, when social media was important to me. I am out of the social media game in so many ways. You can go to Facebook, put in Steve Fodor. I am on there. You can go to Instagram and see all of my adventures. I just got back from a trip to Seattle where I went to all of the filming sites for the TV show Twin Peaks and had such wonderful adventures. The Fodor's travel guide is not my family, but when I travel, I'm sharing my adventures with everybody, and I have a lot of followers that are very happy to see the joy that I get in going to all these fun places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Young Frankenstein. This has been a blast. And as we sort of said before the call, like a long time coming. You've been in my spreadsheet for a long time as I've kind of eventually gotten around to this project. So I'm glad that we were finally able to make it happen. And, hopefully we can get you back on the mic, either on your own show again sometime soon, or at the very least, we'll definitely keep you in the mix here at Crooked Table.
In less than 4 years.
Yes, I know.
My writer says it has to be Mel Brooks related. So we had the Muppet movie, and now we have Young Frankenstein. True. It has to be It has to be something about Mel Brooks.
Well, you know what? It's funny too because I know you've also been on the Beard Owl podcast, and Lauren's a good friend, as is Russ. So she and I we keep trying to find overlapping Weird Al in movies. So there's obviously the UHF and Weird the Al Yankovic story, but there's also we saw Ruth. I was on in her episode about the song Toothless People, and we talked about Ruthless People, the movie. And so there's lots of little cross sections. So I'll have to see
when you get to the Zucker brothers. I'm all in for the Zucker brothers. I just went to go see Airplane with the two stars of Airplane who are touring right now, watching the movie and doing a Q&A. So I will discuss those films anytime with you, my friend.
Absolutely. I'll find that or something Mel Brooks tangentially related. We'll figure out something. But thanks for being here. This was a blast, my friend.
Thank you for doing it. What hump?